Welcome to the Fushimiverse, the dual twins of anime that'll make you continuously say, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Hello everybody. So, I finished this anime, as well as Eromanga-sensei, together about a month and a half ago. So going into this, I wanted to pursue the weirdest of the weird, the strangest anime that I could get my hands on, or so I thought. I was more so pursuing the anime that had a certain quality to it, a certain thing that is often looked down upon, and I wanted to see if it's as bad as people say. And I've got to say, from my experience with these two shows, it is very much not as bad as you think. It's really not as bad. Yeah. I'm going to be analyzing at least a little bit of the story for both of these and giving my thoughts on what I believe to be the proper assessment of both of these series. So the reason I'm grouping these together, unlike To Love Ru, where I had separate reviews that were each like 50 minutes long, is because these take place in the same universe, which, by the way, I think is really awesome for an anime that are two separate series to take place in the same universe. I never expected that, and I actually watched Eromanga-sensei first and then saw an Oreimo cameo. And I recognized the characters because, guess what? Oreimo was next on the list. So I actually watched them in reverse order of the timeline because I didn't know that there was a timeline to even think about here. But it turns out there was, although it wasn't massive spoilers or anything, so it didn't ruin anything. Not to mention the ending of Oreimo, we'll get to that. Let's start with the reputation for these two, because I'm not going to drone on for too long. In fact, I actually recorded this already, and it took me 47 minutes, so yeah, I'm going to try to not do that. Long story short, these shows, particularly Oreimo, have a terrible reputation, a very bad reputation, and it is for that reason that I wanted to delve into it and give my thoughts, because typically whenever I review stuff, I have a very objective view of it, or at least objective in the sense that I can see where the vision is, I can see what the idea for each and every series is, even if I don't personally enjoy it. And also, namely, I don't tend to dislike whatever I watch. There are very few things that will make me genuinely hate it. And let me tell you guys, Oreimo got really close to being in that category. It was very close. The only thing that saved this series was being able to look up the ending and finding an analysis on it. And thank God I did that, but we'll get to that, fellas. We're going to be starting, of course, with Oreimo because it takes place first, and then we're going to focus on Eromanga-sensei second because it takes place after the fact, and also because I have less to say about it, therefore it's going to go by faster. So let's jump straight into this, fellas. So the Oreimo, we're going to start off and mostly focus on the characters, because the characters in this series are the most important element of it that cannot be ignored. And the reason I say that is pretty much the characters in this show are a make or break for people. The setting of the show is pretty mundane. The idea of the show is interesting enough, but not really worth commenting on in terms of my rating for it. It's an anime backdrop, essentially. Think of it like a visual novel, if you will. If you get the joke, you get the joke, right? In the case of Oreimo, the characters are the central focus, of course. It is a harem subgenre, of course, of romance anime, so there's an added little flavor to it, an added twist. However, that also presents an extreme issue in this show. The reason there is an issue is because doing that subgenre is very hard to balance. Some do it great, and others do it terribly. And it is for that reason it significantly impacts the story with the personalities of each of these characters. So we're going to breeze through them as fast as I can. And we're actually going to start with the side characters because I tend to talk the longest about main characters. So let's first comment on Manami, the Mrs. Plain, as she's called in the story, which is what it sounds like. She is very average, as bare bones as it gets, has basically zero personality. She's like the home brand housewife. That's what they advertise her as in this show. very mundane, very Walmart grade, nothing of interest. However, she's a very wholesome character and the best friend of the main character being Kyosuke. She is very important to the plot, particularly because she is an antagonist to Kirino in a lot of ways. Kirino being the other main character and the sister of Kyosuke. She is essentially the thing from the very beginning standing in the way of Kirino being a normal sibling and being a complete freak show. And it is also for this reason that Manami is a pretty funny character to watch. However, and in the very last episode, she turns like Order 66. It is crazy. Because she goes from chill, completely fine, to just, I've been plotting this since the beginning. And she gets the crap beaten out of her. She beats the crap out of Kirino. She runs away, threatens to snitch, right? Because we all love a good snitch. Asked your cellmate in prison. And in the meantime, she is generally a very basic character. There's not a whole lot to be said about her. She is obviously attracted to Kyosuke, thinks that they should be married, thinks they're basically set up from the beginning to be married. Very default characters. Then we got Sayori. Absolute great character. Peak character. I would put her on a tier list to say one of my favorite characters, but she doesn't have enough screen time, I think. Although she's a very fun, very goofy character. Kind of talks a little bit archaic, but also it adds a little bit of flavor, a little bit of taste to it, and I appreciate that for the character. That being said, the most notable attribute that I got out of Sayori is I have never before seen a character where you look at them and you're like, yep, this is what the character looks like, and then they take off their glasses and then their hairbands, and you're like, holy crap, Sayori's a smoke show. That was the biggest twist of this whole show, was seeing Sayori's appearance without her goofy glasses and other accessories on. That was honestly insane. That made the whole show right there, okay? I'm a simple guy with simple taste. Sayori, getting her backstory too, that was pretty cool. That was a nice little addition. Wasn't really necessary, but it was some good expansion on the universe. That being said, she's also later on kind of attracted to Kyosuke, but she's a lot more subtle with it, first of all. Second of all, she's the only female character that doesn't actively confess to Kyosuke. And the third thing is she's kind of the mediator for a lot of the conflicts in this show. Next up, I'm not really going to talk about her practically at all, but it is Kaneko. Kaneko is a very goofy, she's also sort of a tsundere character, except she has way less focus, and she makes some good jokes. She also makes this comment here, which is pretty accurate, because we're about to talk about Ayase in a second here. Speaking of which, Ayase Aragaki, yeah, that's who we're talking about. She is very homo-repressed. Also follows more so the yandere archetype, although she doesn't try to kill you or stab you to death. I mean, she gets close, kind of. She's a very silly character. Also follows a lot of Kirino's physical abuse elements, which not a big fan of. We'll get to that more in a moment. Pretty straightforward of a character, very clingy friend, but also somehow between the most loyal and disloyal friend I've ever seen in an anime. Seriously, the first scene she's in for longer than a minute, they're in the pouring rain. Kirino just got all these manga, she just got all this stuff, they were just out with friends, being Kirineko and Sayori, and they're having a blast. Then Ayase shows up, demands an explanation like Kirino's her girlfriend or something, and then she grabs one of the manga out of the bag, or I think it dropped, okay? Then she opens up a page, looks at, must have been a single word, instantaneously drops it, it's still in the pouring rain, by the way, destruction of property, and then goes,
"We should stop being friends."
It immediately leaves. And keep in mind, this little rambunctious explanation I just gave here, yeah, this actual moment was probably maybe 2 seconds long, if even that. This was the fastest, you're no longer my friend moment I've ever seen in fiction history. It was amazing. I've never seen anything like it. So anyways, Kyosuke ends up helping Ayase and Kirino patch that up, so they resolve that issue, yada yada. She's also attracted to Kyosuke later on, or you could argue she was since the beginning. However, she gets rejected because Kyosuke's got eyes for somebody a little bit more related. Now that we've gone through all the side characters, let's get to the main characters, starting with Kirineko. Definitely the audience's favorite. Everybody thinks that she should be the one winning. And oh boy, never before have I seen a twist such as the one present in this show where Kirineko essentially does get with Kyosuke. I was completely surprised because I was under the impression this is going to be straightforward. Usually in romance anime, once the main character enters a relationship that doesn't take place in the first episode alone, it's permanent. It's going to last forever. That's good game. That's GG's. But in this case, it didn't. You know why? Because Kirineko loves to play games. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. She is the entire reason I repeat that phrase for this show. This is where the frustration comes into play, boys. I know you were waiting for it, and here it is. Oreimo's biggest problem is playing games. The main characters love to play games, and this is especially annoying when you have a bunch of female suitors, and this goes for male suitors too. If you have multiple of any gender vying for a single partner or single potential partner, the last thing that you want to do is play games and pretend like you're not interested, because you know what's going to happen? They're gonna look at one of the several other people in the room and say, that's who I want instead. And then when you go, wait, no, I was joking, too late, Buster. He already made up his mind. And trust me, when an anime main character, a male main character in particular, makes up his mind about a partner, it's permanent. It's permanent in the show. It doesn't matter if they beat him every day. It's permanent. That's good game. So, in this case with Kirineko, she actually gets with Kyosuke. And they last for several months. Things are happy. Things are going great. Honestly, they had me fooled. I thought, maybe this is going to turn out right. Nope. Turns out, Kirineko planned kind of in a weird, elaborate way. She understands that Kirino and Kyosuke are in love with each other in a taboo sort of attraction. And so because of that, she kind of plans for them to be together. But in the meantime, she wants to spend this time with Kyosuke so she can get kind of what she wants out of it. It's hard to explain, more so because it is so illogical that I couldn't explain it to you because I don't understand the rationale behind it. But maybe if you look up an analysis, you'd understand it more. In a sense, Kirineko is sort of the spiritual soulmate of Kirino. She is the perfect foil for her, and therefore she kind of understands that Kirino deserves Kyosuke, and Kirineko has kind of arguably an inferiority complex and believes that she doesn't deserve happiness. To an extent. It's kind of weird. And then, of course, after breaking up with him for practically no reason over the summer, then later on, she comes crawling back and she declares her love. Guess what, fellas? It's too late. And this is where we get into the biggest make or break of this entire series. The thing that I really want to talk about is Kirino and Kyosuke. So Kyosuke is the main character of Oreimo. He is the central focus and the narrator of this show. So, he is the typical, average, plain, and mundane male main character of a romance anime. However, he is very tolerable, and I actually enjoy watching him because, first of all, he is entertaining. Keep that in mind because that is going to play a major role in Kirino in just a moment. Second, Kyosuke actually is able to an extent, not always, stand up for himself. And he's not like Rito Yuki. He doesn't lock up and make stupid, mindless decisions. He at least goes through everything, thinks it through, runs through it, and he goes with what he thinks is the right action to take. And he is constantly trying to protect his sister Kirino, which also bites him in the back constantly, but he doesn't care. He wants to do it. And it's admirable. I can understand him as a character. I can respect him as a man, and I think that is a valuable quality to have for a main character. I want to be able to understand the main character. I think he's relatable not on a personal level, but on a level of being a grounded person. If you remember, or if you've seen my To Love Ru reviews, one thing that I always say is Rito Yuki, who is in a similar position as a main character, except at the same time, very different circumstances, doesn't feel human. He feels very alien, ironically, because the characters around him are aliens and they feel more human. To the audience, Rito is a very soulless, robotic kind of main character where he doesn't have motivations necessarily, and he doesn't have realistic responses. Kyosuke, on the other hand, even if he has a weird and taboo attraction to Kirino, at the same time, he is understandable as a person. I can picture somebody being like him in real life, which you could argue the writer is like him in real life, but hey, that's not for me to judge. In the meantime, Kyosuke is also kind of a doormat. And that's my problem with him, mostly, is he takes a lot of crap from a lot of people, particularly Kirino and Ayase, especially Kirino. He is always being beaten. And this is where we get to Kirino. So Kirino is the make or break of Oreimo. Now, you'd think one single character would not be enough to make or break an entire show or an entire anime. However, you would be wrong. The majority of the negative sentiment about Oreimo comes from Kirino. It comes from Kirino because she is the embodiment of the tsundere archetype in the most toxic and grotesque sense. You see, if we compare her to other tsundere archetypes, such as Taiga from Toradora, which, by the way, is referenced in Eromanga-sensei, just want to point that out, or Nino Nakano in Quintessential Quintuplets, we see a huge contrast in how the tsundere archetype is handled. So, the best case of this is Nino Nakano, who is lightly a tsundere. At the very beginning, a lot of people think that she's very insufferable. She is very aggressive towards Futaro, and while she's not physically hostile, she, of course, is constantly giving him crap, constantly pushing her sisters away from Futaro, mostly because she doesn't trust him, but also because she's got some problems of her own. However, that being said, Nino becomes better over the course of Quintessential Quintuplets, and on top of that, grows a lot as a person. And she also grows to trust Futaro, and honestly becomes one of his more helpful confidants. Now we get to Taiga from Toradora. You see, Taiga is more of the physically abusive aspect of the tsundere archetype, and a lot of people have a bad taste put in their mouth just from this archetype alone, no matter how well it's handled. In the case of Taiga, she starts out very insufferable. Now, I personally liked her at first, past the first episode, I mean. However, a lot of people really don't like Taiga for the majority of Toradora. However, over the course of the story, she becomes closer to all of the characters, especially Ryuji, and eventually she softens up a lot, stops being physically hostile majority of the time, and finally is able to be honest with herself, and she gets over a lot of her problems, and she starts to take responsibility. Now, this is, of course, very different from Kirino. The reason people do not like Kirino, not only is she bossy, mean, and physically abusive, but on top of that, she does not grow as a person over the course of Oreimo. She grows a tiny bit, you could argue. She, of course, gets friends in the form of Kirineko that can accept her, or like Sayori. She is able to kind of bring Ayase more into the realm of otaku without forcing it upon her. She is able to warm up to her brother, Kyosuke, once again after a long period of time where she was very hostile towards him. That being said, the entirety of Season 1 is nothing but Kirino giving Kyosuke crap, non-stop. He saves her all the time. She never thanks him. If she does thank him, it is a second-long brief and usually followed by a slap or some sort of negative commentary. It is very repulsive to watch. And on top of that, she slaps him / punches him or kicks him at least, I counted, about 20 times throughout Season 1. I think it's 25 times, but it might be more than that. In the first episode alone, I know she slaps him 5 or 6 times when he's just waking up. Absolutely ridiculous. She kicks him in the balls at one point as well. I mean, that alone deserves a slap or something back. I mean, come on, man. And your own brother, too? Don't worry, that's just the tip of the iceberg. She's also verbally abusive, so constantly yelling, constantly giving people crap. And what's the most annoying quality? Well, we're playing games. Once again, we're back at it again. We're playing games. They love to play games. The biggest portrayal of this is when she pretends that this guy, I don't remember what his name was because it's not really important, was her boyfriend. She pretended that that was the case to make Kyosuke jealous. Ringing any bells, gentlemen? So, that frustrates a lot of the audience, because obviously the audience knows that it's a lie, but Kyosuke, it's bringing him immense pain, and she doesn't apologize for it, she doesn't do anything to make it better, and it's pointless. It really is pointless. Not to mention, she knows that her attraction to him is taboo. She knows she can't just run straight into it, and she also knows he can't run straight into it either. It's actually worse if he does that, in fact. This is a pointless gesture, just for the sake of bringing pain. And this, of course, isn't including all of the millions of other things, like, for example, Season 1, at the very end, they convince her not to go with the track and field team to America, because apparently you can just let a 14-year-old go to a foreign country several thousand miles away from home for track and field, especially when they don't plan to do it professionally. I don't know what they were thinking, but that's something they do, apparently. So they convinced Kirino to not go through with it because, after all, there's so much better stuff at home. Then in the OVAs, the first set of OVAs, I mean, she goes anyways, off screen. She goes to the United States and pretty much dips on everybody, and then refuses to talk to everyone. So she ghosts everyone, everything's over, nobody knows what's going on, and everybody's upset. And then in this time, Kirineko and Kyosuke are able to get closer. Then, when Kirino is practically dragged back to Japan by Kyosuke, she wants to make everything a little bit worse. And it leaves a bad taste in the audience's mouth. And so, the reason I'm explaining all of this, and I'm not going into all the plot and things like that exactly, and just talking about the characters, is because Kirino alone is able to decide whether you like Oreimo or not. If you are able to tolerate her BS throughout this entire series, then you will enjoy it. It is very funny. The music in both of these shows, in Oreimo and Eromanga-sensei, is phenomenal. And the outros, I'm surprised they managed to make that many outro themes and outro visuals. They did a great job. 2 whole seasons and 2 sets of OVAs. They got a unique outro for each one of them. That alone, the effort was amazing. The visuals are good. The animation, I mean, it's a little outdated relative to other stuff you've probably seen, but it's really good. This doesn't apply to Eromanga-sensei, by the way. The animation in that show was amazing. But in regards to Oreimo, everything is well done. The voice acting is good. Of course, it's only in Japanese, so there's a lot more variety in what you hear. I'm not hearing the same 20 people on rotation, which I love all the English voice actors, but you do kind of get tired of hearing their voices after a while. And so with all those factors combined, all the fun elements, all the goofy stuff, the little side B plots going on, like one really funny moment where Kyosuke and his best friend are in line for 2 separate manga, and one of them was for Kirino, obviously being Kyosuke, and the other was his best friend who was in line for his own sister. And, everybody in the line thinks that the 2 of them are gay because his best friend basically declares, "I love homos," which was a very funny moment just because of how abrupt and stupid it is. It's very ridiculous how it's performed, and that makes it a lot more entertaining. Moments like that, little moments, make it great. Or little subtle jokes, like, for example, Kirineko's actual name is Goko. Sayori's, I guess, a part of her name or something, is Virginia, which obviously the joke being Goku and Vegeta. So it's subtle things like that that add to the flavor and the quality of Oreimo. Now let's talk about the ending, because this is the last aspect that is also the make or break of this. Most people hate the ending of Oreimo. Why? Well, basically, long story short, out of all of the female characters, Kyosuke not only picks his sister, but he also picks his sister, which is extremely aggressive. You see, the fundamental of it isn't bad on its own, from the standpoint of the anime. You walk into the show expecting it. Because, I mean, all you had to do is look at the title, stupid, and you know what it means. So you already expect it. You've gotten over that a long time ago. It is the contents, however, that is the problem. The contents are, of course, Kirino is very hostile, very aggressive, very annoying. And everyone else is infinitely better. They get better screen time, they have better chemistry, etc. And they lose their chance because Kyosuke has made up his mind. And even by the end, even in the end, I was like, okay, you've made your decision. I'm okay with that. Most people were mad just for that alone. Then it got to the moment at the very end. We had 2 minutes. 2 minutes left of the final episode. 2 minutes. I still remember. We were so close. They're in the chapel or wherever it is. They're getting married, okay? Or at least doing a mock marriage because legally you're not allowed to get married if you're, related. They're doing a wedding, little thing between the two of them. They go through it all. I'm like, all right, this is the conclusion. Then they reveal that their plan was to break up after graduation, which, by the way, was like 2 weeks after they admitted their feelings for each other. In other words, they break off their relationship that they threw everything away for. They weren't doing anything in that time. And I'm not saying it is appropriate to do anything in that time, but if you were gonna do that, I mean, do something, right? Don't just throw everything away and then go, all right, whatever. It's like doing heroin for no reason, and then you're like, all right, guess I ruined my life. I'll stop doing heroin now. I guess? Like, really? I mean, don't keep doing it, but at the same time, why? I don't know. It blew my mind. So anyways, that was a jaw dropper, and then I went on Discord and complained about it for 3 hours straight. Shout out to Yukari Slop Emporium. He can tell you all about it. So in the meantime, after that, I was pretty upset. The next day, I looked it up on Google, and I started to go through various things, trying to analyze the ending, trying to figure out what went wrong, and at last, I never thought of something in particular, and that is the main character is lying to the audience. I never thought of it. Somehow, I never thought of it. And then it hit me. The entire story of Oreimo is told from Kyosuke's perspective. Not only is it told from his perspective, but he narrates it. And what happens when somebody is narrating a story to an audience? Well, that means they are communicating directly with the audience, and therefore, they're not always right, and they're not always telling the truth. I mean, it's classic Edgar Allan Poe. So with that in mind, I realized he doesn't have to tell me what's going on. It can be implied. Then I started digging deeper, started thinking about it harder and harder. There's a certain thing that occurs earlier on where, long story short, Kyosuke gets an A on his exam for school. And the agreement between him and Kirino was that if he got an A, she would do one thing that he wants, anything that he wants, for one wish. He saved that one wish for the very, very end, where they've already broken off their whole thing. And he says, basically, he wants to use his one wish. And then Kirino remarks that they need to have some counseling. In other words, they need to talk. And she says it, and she's happy when she says it. And all he does is he kisses her on the cheek. And so the analysis, essentially, with also some input from the author, which is the most important part, basically states that this is his one wish, is to break the promise. The promise to essentially go back to normal after graduation. And he breaks that promise, and so they're essentially together, but secretly. And it makes sense, because as the narrator, he is kind of subtly nudging you that, hey, we're still together, but nobody's supposed to know, because remember, it is taboo. So, as a result, the ending is infinitely better, and it's also supported in another case that I did not expect, in Eromanga-sensei. Remember, they take place in the same universe, but what I didn't think was going to happen was in the Eromanga-sensei light novel, or maybe it's the manga, I'm not really sure, there is a part from Kirino where she talks about doing something for Kyosuke and basically implies that she's with him, right? And I never even considered it. But it all makes sense when you put all the pieces together, and then if you see in Eromanga-sensei and the little cameo that the Oreimo characters have in it, you see Kirineko, Sayori, Kyosuke, and Kirino are all together. And they seem close and like things are going as usual. All of this corrects the ending. It fixes it for me. And the ending was never broken, but it was poorly delivered. And when you have a poorly executed ending, people don't get it. you have to make the ending clear for people. Now, it doesn't have to spell it out for you, and you can also have an ambiguous ending. I mean, look at The Thing 1982, but you know the thing about The Thing? Well, it wasn't a relationship. Relationships require some sense of closure. You need to at least know, are they together? Are they not together? Otherwise, the romance is ruined. Because remember, this is the romance genre. That is the point you are watching it for. And in addition to that, the entertainment quality. And the entertainment is ruined by not having a nice ending. In contrast to something where you can have an ambiguous ending, and it's that. It's a horror movie. It makes sense. With all of that together, compounded, I am able to safely say that Oreimo did not disappoint me. I had a good time with this anime, and I was very surprised when I figured out by probably episode 3, holy crap, it actually has a good story. It actually has good characters, and it was a blast to watch. I had fun. The hate for it is definitely overinflated. And I mean, this is a lot of years later. I don't even know how many years later that I'm saying this. I don't know. It's a long time after its original creation, and I'm saying this about it. Yeah, that's what I have to say about Oreimo. If I had to give it a ranking, I would give it a good 8 out of 10. Now, this is lower than most of the shows that I've reviewed. In fact, I think it's lower than all of the shows I reviewed. However, it isn't lower than all the shows I've talked about, since obviously there are shows I actually dislike, and then this is not one of them. I had a good time with Oreimo. I would recommend watching it for people that are able to really get through an elaborate story, but it does have the weird element. That being said, the weirdness is not even on the map compared to the stuff I've seen. After To Love Ru, nothing is weird. And I thought that was really funny watching this, because then I realized I might have already hit rock bottom, so I don't think it can get worse. And watching this, it wasn't worse. It wasn't even close to worse. And there's also not, this is important, there's not a sexual aspect to it. It's entirely focused on romantic aspect. Now, there is implied sexual content within it, but it is not explicitly pushed in your face. That is, of course, in contrast to the next series. We are moving on to Eromanga-sensei. I do not have a whole lot to say about this series. First of all, it is a little more vulgar and a little bit more on the nose, let's say, with some of the content in this show. Now, the differences are kind of minute to a good extent. Long story short, Masamune is the main character. He is a writer, and Sagiri Izumi, his little sister, or really his stepsister, see how this is coming into play here, is known as Eromanga-sensei online. That is her alias. She is his illustrator secretly, which he figures out, I think, in like episode 2 or 3. So he knows it for most of the series. Long story short, he starts to meet other writers, starts to interact with other people, and Sagiri is agoraphobic. She stays in her room. She's kind of like Kaede from the first season of Rascal Does Not Dream, except instead of wandering around the house and not going outside, she doesn't even leave her room unless nobody is home, and then she'll leave very briefly and then race back up to her room. She starts to get a little bit more comfortable later on, but overall doesn't go outside. She actually doesn't step outside for the entire time, so that's an interesting quality. There isn't a whole lot to say about this series. I actually enjoyed it a lot more than Oreimo, just because I thought it was more entertaining, a lot more silly, a lot more fun in general. The animation was better, but I mean, that's kind of a given anyways. And let me tell you, Elf Yamada, they do the exact same thing with Oreimo in this case, where they have a fantastic suitor for Masamune, the perfect person that the audience just loves. They make you fall in love with this character, and then Masamune doesn't pick her, which in this show, you could argue it's slightly more understandable for a few reasons. First of all, people like this show typically more because Sagiri is a more fun character to watch. Kirino is purely negative throughout the entirety of Oreimo, while compared to Sagiri, who is kind of cute, pouty, goofy, and just a fun overall character to watch, which makes them more tolerable for the audience, and therefore the audience is able to kind of wave their hand and say, it's not a terrible option. In addition to that, they play into the it's fate aspect of things, which you can label as kind of corny or cliche, and that is a valid argument. However, there is something I want to point out about that, and it's, in my personal opinion, I kind of like that plot direction. Here's why. Hollywood tends to use it as an excuse and a plot device that never works. With anime, it usually does work because they create a nice parallel. With Sagiri, there is a great parallel where they were, obviously, you know, she's younger than he is, but they were both little kids when they were getting into illustration on Sagiri's end and writing on Masamune's end as an author. Then, when they became siblings, you know, because Sagiri's mother married Masamune's father, then it creates that parallel again. There's that attachment already there. There is already affection between the two characters. They are not necessarily at odds with each other. Of course, Sagiri refuses to physically see her brother. However, she doesn't refuse to interact with him necessarily, and she also doesn't dislike her brother. Not to mention, she isn't physically abusive to him, so of course that plays a heavy role in understanding this, because you have to think of it from the main character's perspective. What would he look for in a partner? Well, if he already thinks he has it, right? In the case of Masamune, he's already attracted to the qualities that Sagiri has, then he's going to go with Sagiri. It's that simple. And while Elf is a good suitor, she isn't what he's looking for, and it's just that simple. And so, as fate would have it, him and Sagiri would end up together. And for a little cherry on top, nice bonus, or at least I think it's nice, in the manga/light novel, they are actually able to get married, you know, because they're not blood related, so then it's allowed by law. So, you take that as you will. I think it's nice just because they're able to do what they want, and overall, there's not a whole lot of friction created in this show. It's a lot more like Harimia in the sense that it's kind of chill and laid back, while Oreimo is nothing but tension the entire time. And it is for that reason that I personally prefer Eromanga-sensei. Not to mention, the outro theme is simply peak. Of course, there is also several appearances from the Oreimo characters within Eromanga-sensei that take place in the same universe, so the same anime that's super popular also exists in this. There are tons of references, tons of fun stuff, and it has, I would say, a good screen time. I would wish for a season 2, but it's not entirely necessary because the light novel and manga more than make up for it. Overall, I would give Eromanga-sensei probably an 8.5 or 9 out of 10. Because it accomplishes what it's trying to accomplish, it does a lot of fun stuff in the process, and it doesn't weird out the audience too much. There's some stuff that's like, you gotta step back away from it for a moment, but overall, there's not a lot of bad stuff. I didn't mention some of the other characters in this series just because I don't think they're that important in swaying my opinion. Not to mention some of them, like Megami, don't really have that much screen time. So the only ones I would really think about are Masamune, Sagiri, and Elf. And that is all for this time, guys. If you guys enjoyed, leave comments down below. Tell me what you think about these series. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. If you guys enjoyed, please leave a like, a comment. I will see you all in the next anime video. Have a fantastic day and a fantastic life. Goodbye, everyone.